So my best friend gave me a ring the other day and he's like, hey Trav, what do you think about me refinancing my house and kicking some equity out? And he had bought his first house about 3 years ago, and he's got about 100 grand or so in equity, maybe a little bit more. And I asked him, all right, what's your game plan? Like, what would you do with this 100 grand if you were to refinance it? How would you invest it? What would you do? What's your game plan? And personally, I'm of the mindset that I like to have my home paid for, and I don't pull equity out of our house, just because I don't view my house as an asset. I view it as a liability, and we have to have housing of some level. But my policy on housing is paid for. I want to get as paid for as possible. My friend is like, hey man, well, what if I kicked it out and I bought, another property with it, and I rented this property, created a cash flow, and then used part of that additional cash flow to cover the cost of the new mortgage, essentially dropping my mortgage rate below what it is now for a secondary property. I was like, dude, I love that idea. Like, we circled around with that, and I was like, dude, I like that idea a lot, because he's at the spot where he's got a growing family. He's thinking about maybe a mother-in-law who watches his kids all the time, because him and his wife both work full-time. So he's thinking about maybe a larger property with possibly a mother-in-law suite attached. And I'm like, dude, that'd be a great idea. The other thing he was thinking about was adding a pool, because pool parties. And I was like, pools don't add any equity to your home. Pools just add negative cash flow to your home. But my biggest question with him was, well, what's your game plan for this cash? Like, are you going to sit on this cash, or are you going to invest this cash? Well, I would invest it. All right, well, what are you going to do? Well, he's going to buy additional real estate, but then he asks, well, dude, everything's kind of really high right now. And I'm like, yeah. So it's a big issue as far as, well, what would you do with this additional cash you could potentially come into? Here's my macro outlook on this. I hear the inflation narrative everywhere. Everyone's worried about inflation. I personally think that we're going to just see transitory inflation, meaning like a year or two. We're going to see some inflation. Fewer goods and services being produced, and more currency units being pumped into the economy. So I see that as an inflationary event. But long term, I see work from home and all these other trends as hyper deflationary. However, if I'm right and we end up in a hyper deflationary event, meaning the stock market goes down 50%, probably 80%, I would think, from like, if you were to value the market based on its cash flows and profits, which there really is none. So the market, in my opinion, is way overvalued. Could be wrong on that, but also could be super right on that. And the baby boomers who are heavily invested in the equity market will then retract their spending, which they're already beginning to. And you have work from home, work remote, hire foreign workers. I just see it as a very deflationary period of time. So the common narrative and thesis is, well, there's going to be crazy inflation. I might as well refinance my house, pull the equity out, and make future investments. I should just put it in the stock market. I hear that all the time. And it's like, if there's deflation, now you're in a situation where you have more debt on the assets that you own. Hopefully your cash flow goes up. But if there's a really bad recession, depression, anything like that, and your cash flow decreases, well, now you're in a situation where you're setting yourself up to probably lose a significant amount of your net worth, which is a really bad situation to be in if you find yourself in another 08, 09 time period where assets are cheap or cheaper than they are now, yet you're not in a position to go ahead and buy them. And so my recap to my best friend was like, personally, I think you ought to double down on your house payments and knock that thing out, just because that's going to save you like 3.5% interest a year on $200,000 mortgage. I mean, that's literally going to save you like $7,000 a year by just knocking that thing out. So I see that as a decent investment. Obviously, if you think that there's going to be crazy inflation, you would want to finance something now and then pay it back with cheaper dollars. But that's assuming that your wages or your business revenues also go up with that inflation. And I just don't think it's super probable at this point in time. I think that what's more likely to occur is that we'll have this deflationary period, people will retract spending, and then at that point, the federal government will begin to print unlimited amounts of currency as they've been doing, and they'll literally push them into circulation through like a universal basic income. And I think at that point, yeah, you could definitely end up in a hyperinflationary situation, but first deflation. And if you think about it, kind of in a really evil way, if you had a crazy deflationary event, people were under the narrative of inflation, so they went and they consumed, and then they found themselves in a deflationary event, they would pretty much lose everything. And then if that was followed with a rapid inflation or hyperinflationary event, because they take, say, federal currency units and just print them worthless, like, you could wipe out basically everybody. And so I think the best way to play this is to play it defensively, to where you have the minimal amount of liabilities that you could possibly have. And if there is inflation, maybe you lose just a little bit of upside gains. But if there's deflation, you're in a much better position. So in a way, you're hedging your bets to where you're really protecting the downside risk, and you're maybe at the expense of foregoing a little bit of the upside, which I think is a small cost to pay when the future is extremely unknown. Just my 2 cents. Thanks for watching.